Chapter 24. At Last, the Awakening. During this whole time of superactivity, I did not cut down on the commitment I had made in 1964. My daily meditations and prayer life continued as usual, although it was becoming increasingly more difficult to maintain. But I gave my word and I refused to back down. It wasn't until November 17, 1970, 6 years later, that I received my first response, which was more than I ever hoped for. Beyond anything I could have dreamt up or invented. Nothing I had ever experienced before prepared me for the impact it made on me. Nothing could ever erase the memory of it. What happened to me was so extraordinary that every sacrifice I had ever made up till that moment, every inconvenience I ever endured, and every dark night in which my soul was troubled, all of that was completely insignificant and unimportant compared to what I experienced that day. I was walking through the aisles inside the Church of St. Bernadette, as I was accustomed to do. It was in the early evening, just before supper, but already dark outside. As I was walking toward the altar, a ball of light about 7 or 8 feet in diameter appeared between me and the altar. I could not see the altar behind it. The light became so brilliant that I was afraid of being blinded. But knowing that it was no ordinary light, I kept staring at it. Then all of a sudden I saw a most heavenly, dazzling, magnificent figure inside the ball of light. He was even brighter than the light surrounding him, which I couldn't imagine possible. He looked at me with a soft, gentle smile, and I was not afraid. But in his presence I realized how imperfect I was, how sinful compared to this perfect being. It was practically impossible then, as well as now, to put into words what I was experiencing. I rarely ever got teary-eyed or emotional, but it seemed that these mystical experiences had opened up a totally new channel of sensitivity within me. I was trained to remain in control, yet in the presence of such greatness I could not help myself. I wept with tears of joy that I met in my lifetime the one to whom I had given my life. I dedicated my whole life to him. I gave up having a wife, children, and grandchildren. I limited my talents to the service of others in his name. He was my master, the one to whom I prayed for the grace to be faithful until my dying breath. There was no question in my mind who it was that visited me. Not a single doubt entered my mind. I automatically fell to my knees. I was not worthy to stand in his presence. I did not know how to act. I simply said, "I love you, but I feel very unworthy." The tears began to stop, and my soul was filled with a peace that went beyond anything I had ever experienced. Even after my Lord had vanished, I was still on my knees for a long time, trying to comprehend the indescribable enormity and grandeur of what I had just experienced. It belonged to another dimension. The gravity of that moment was not suited to the world in which I grew up. I had read about what mystics refer to as Christ consciousness. They all speak of it as an unforgettable experience. I am certainly in agreement. I have never forgotten what I saw and what I felt. I knew that kind of experience didn't happen often. How fortunate that it even happened once in my lifetime. It not only made life worth living, it was a privilege to be alive on the earth and receive this visitor from the heavenly realms. Needless to say, I could hardly keep my feet on the ground. I had the feeling that I was flying the rest of that day. In the graduate courses of biblical theology at U of D, they use the word discontinuity to refer to a divine intervention. This occurred when there was an interruption or discontinuity in the normal course of events. God's power being at work alters the outcome of the event. Throughout the Bible, there are many instances in which divine intervention changed the course of salvation history. For example, when Moses and the Hebrews crossed the sea to flee from the Egyptian soldiers and achieved freedom, that was a discontinuity. And when Jesus entered this world through a virgin birth and later rose miraculously from the dead on the first Easter, God's power was at work. The Lord certainly altered the course of my life. I now had first-hand experience that the presence of God is a reality, that Jesus is truly the Prince of Peace, one of his many titles. Was I deceived? Not at all. There was much more to come. That was only the beginning. I waited 6 years, and now the Lord was about to take the initiative. In my wildest dreams, I could not have produced what took place in church that day. That same night, I went to bed filled with excitement. I managed to get to sleep, but in the middle of the night, at 4 a.m. to be exact, I was suddenly awakened as if someone shook me. It was quite unusual for me to wake up during the night unless the phone rang. I generally slept through the entire night from sheer exhaustion. On that particular occasion, I found myself very alert and fully awake, lying there at 4 a.m. in complete darkness. After a few moments, I saw a light coming toward me. First, it was a point of light, and then it became larger every second. There was no doubt that the light was moving closer and closer. When it came within about 10 feet, it took the shape of an eye, with the eyelid made of what looked like embroidered gold. It was an extremely clear image in the total darkness of the room. Light emanated from the image itself. As it continued to get closer and closer, the jet-black pupil kept getting larger. When it reached me, I was in a sense pulled into the eye. Then I continued to gain speed and went through a tunnel. I saw the night sky at the end of the tunnel. When I came out of the tunnel, I looked around and found myself out in space, beyond the Earth and the Moon. Believe me, this was not the result of reading too much science fiction. I never read such books. Here I was floating in outer space without a spacesuit on and not sure how I got there or why I was there. While I was pondering the situation, a hand reached out to me and a familiar voice said, "Do not be afraid. I will guide you." I did not look at the one who spoke, and it did not seem to be the time to ask. I was thrilled to be accompanied out in space by someone who spoke with such confidence and self-assurance. This much I knew. I felt completely secure with the guide who offered to show me the way. He held my hand firmly, and we started traveling rapidly. We were moving at astronomical speeds beyond comprehension. We went beyond our galaxy into the far reaches of space. The guide pointed out different nebulas, galaxies, planets, and other interesting cosmic phenomena. It was by far the longest trip I had ever made, and without doubt the fastest. After the cosmic experience, we returned, pausing just above the rectory. While I was brought back very slowly into my bedroom, I could see my body lying there asleep. The guide very gently put me back into my physical body. As soon as he did, my physical eyes opened, and I was looking at the ceiling. I turned to the side and looked at the clock. It was exactly 5 a.m. 1 full hour had gone by. We covered a lot of territory. I then looked around the room. No one was visible to me. That added greatly to my already exuberant day. I was very excited later that morning when I awoke and got up, body and all. If someone told me he or she went through a tunnel last night and traveled through the cosmos at phenomenal speeds for a full hour, I would question that person's sanity or veracity. How could anyone believe such a story? How could I even believe it? And yet I actually experienced it. On the other hand, I would be foolish if I denied having a real experience in which I was fully awake. And this was a very moving experience filled with emotion which I viewed undeniably with my own eyes. Nor would any average sane person who was, without question, awake, deny the experience of the senses. I was so excited that I was whistling and humming tunes for the rest of the day. I could hardly contain myself. The very next night, I went to sleep without any trouble. Again, at 4 a.m., I was awakened. This time, I saw many points of light that reminded me of many stars moving in a circle. The stars, banding together, then took the shape of a magnificent royal crown, which was composed, to all appearances, of the most sparkling and radiant gold I had ever seen. There were precious jewels at different points, and in key areas on the crown itself, which was several times larger than a full moon in the sky. I was very curious. I asked, "What is the meaning of the crown?" The guide said, "It represents all of reality. It is God's kingdom. All that exists is represented here." Am I somehow on that crown too? I had to ask. "Of course," he replied. Then the crown, which at first was distant, began to move closer. It increased rapidly in size and zeroed in on one singular area of the crown to the extent that we were literally surrounded by jewels and precious metals. Finally, after enormous magnification, there was a portion of a precious gem directly in front of us. "You are right here," he emphasized. Then the crown began moving back slowly to its original position. I could then see where I was on the crown. It was an exciting moment. This time I had not left the room. Everything took place while I was lying there wide awake. I looked at the clock. It was 4:45 a.m. Naturally, when I got up for Mass later that morning, I was again in ecstasy, and for that matter, all day long. There was no way I could have manufactured such experiences. I neither had the knowledge, nor the desire, nor the ability to conjure up such magnificent images. In spite of all that was happening, my day-to-day living did not change. I continued my meditations as usual. They were far more advanced now compared to my early meditations 6 years before. At times, I had to set the alarm clock so that I would not be meditating well into my next appointment or meeting or whatever was on my schedule. I preferred to meditate at night when I had no other items on the agenda, but often I was too tired to wait until bedtime. The morning was best. If that was not possible, then I waited till evening. The next day, I was again awakened at 4 a.m. This time, I was shown a beautiful lotus flower. It was stunning to look at. It was surrounded by what I could only describe as a divine glow. It was also preceded by points of light that eventually resulted in the image of the lotus. I said with confidence this time, "I know what that is. All is one, and all reality is contained in this symbol." Yes, that is right. The lotus expanded, as did the crown the night before. It magnified to the cellular dimension. A particular cell stood out among all the others around it. I presume that is myself? Correct again, I was told. Then I was given a further explanation and meaning of the lotus in my life. The guide said that just as the lotus had its roots in the mud, so to speak, and the flower rose above the water facing the brightness and life-giving energy of the sun, so was the work I came to do in this life. It was a purpose for which I was born. I said I didn't quite understand. The guide added further information. He said I came to serve the poor and the lower classes of society and to give them hope. They needed encouragement and support and to know that the power and grace of God has never left them, that God's love shines on them even when they feel they are in darkness, like the lotus flower. They were represented by the soil under the water, hidden from the sun. They needed to know that the sun, or God's grace, was nourishing them as well. Helping to bring sight to those in darkness was part of my mission. When the image before me vanished, I noticed it was almost 5 a.m. I couldn't sleep right away. I kept thinking about what was said to me. Actually, my guide shared a lot more than is written here. Interestingly enough, the instructions given to me prepared me for my future priestly ministry. In fact, about 80% of my total ministry was working in the inner city of Detroit, where hope was sorely needed, where families with low income are generally found. That thought gave meaning to an otherwise odd list of 9 parishes to which I was assigned. The highlight of that explanation was fulfilled more than ever when I was appointed pastor of the Most Holy Trinity Church, serving over 30,000 of God's poor that came to us for help each year. The next night, I was fully awake at exactly 4 a.m. This came as no surprise. This time, when the starlights formed a circle as they did before, I was drawn into that circle and went traveling through the tunnel again into outer space. The faithful guide was there, taking me by the hand We were moving beyond light-year speed. We slowed down and I thought we were back home again. Not quite. It was a planet, but not planet Earth. I looked around as we were making a quick entry. There were some green areas, but the outstanding color that I recall was light brown, a rich tan color. When we came closer, all I could see was desert and some foothills in the distance. I did not see any mountains. We stood on the sand of this planet. Only then did I notice some human activity. There were people much like ourselves there, but their lifestyle was much more primitive and simple. I asked the guide if they could see us. He assured me that they could not. "Why are we here?" I asked. He expected my question. He tried to keep the answer as simple as possible for my sake. He said, "There are many such planets throughout the universe. This was only a sample. It would be arrogant to think that this whole universe, with billions and billions of galaxies, and each galaxy having about 100 billion stars, would all be created for one tiny, insignificant, fragile, and almost unnoticeable planet called Earth. To think that only one average star, our sun, among the trillions of stars, is the only place to find life is nothing short of ridiculous. The human race has a lot to learn." There was much more said. The clock was a little past 5 a.m. when we returned to Dearborn, Michigan, USA, planet Earth. What happened to me on those few nights was far beyond the expectations I had in mind when I first began my quest. I was grateful that it only took about 6 years to start getting results. I was ready to go all the way, that is, until my last breath. The one factor that I would not allow to change or weaken within me was being serious. A commitment that was not serious could never stand the test of time or the lack of support or understanding from my closest colleagues and friends. These nightly visits were not over yet. The very next night, after traveling through the universe again, I was awakened at 4 a.m. The time never deviated. I was greeted by a new experience. The guide was present, and I was being instructed once more in matters I knew nothing about. The following night, I received another visit, and another the next night, and another. The 4 a.m. visits and instructions did end after 40 consecutive nights. That is correct. I had a mystical, spiritual, or cosmic experience every night for 40 nights in a row. Some nights after being awakened, I would just lie there while being instructed with a much more profound yet simple theology than I had ever known. Part of that instruction was a clearer understanding of God's action in the world. I do not feel it is necessary to repeat what happened each and every single night, but I will go over the last one, which was nothing short of amazing. On the 40th night, I was awakened at the usual time. All at once before me was a large round stone. It was about a foot thick and reminded me of the Aztec calendar I had seen in the Archaeological Museum in Mexico City, except there were two huge pegs of wood, one connected to the top and the other to the bottom. Although my room was in complete darkness, naturally at 4 a.m., everything, as usual, was very bright and clear. A picture came alive in the circle of the large stone, much like watching a movie on television. As I watched, this time in silence, I was shown the important events in the life of a particular person. It quickly covered his life from early childhood to manhood, ending in his death. The events were logically connected and sort of summed up the values and direction of that person's life. Needless to say, I identified with that man. It was a very early civilization. I was unable to focus on that period of time, and I did not want to interrupt the flow of the images by asking anything. If I were to guess, I would probably say it was Lemuria. I thought it was all over when the screen/stone went blank. Not quite. The wooden pegs remained in place while the stone turned completely around so that the other side of the slab was now visible. Then followed another lifetime. This time, I believed, was in Atlantis. The scene came alive. Again, The salient moments in that person's life were played out from teenage years to old age. I identified with the man in question as I did before. Each of these special events were making a point, bringing out certain important factors in that person's life, what was earned and what was lost. The bottom line was either spiritual growth or lack of it. That was followed by another lifetime. Same format, showing the events that had the greatest impact on a certain man's life. I identified with that life each time. The lives seemed to follow history. After the scenes from Atlantis, there followed a life in Egypt, then China, then Greece, Rome, France, England, and so on. I believed there were 14 different lifetimes presented to me. Each time the stone slab slowly turned around, it introduced another incarnation. I will share an outstanding scene of the 14th and last of my lifetimes given that night, since it seemed to relate to my present life. The young man was not very religious, and his adult life was not much better. He was a professional artist and apparently achieved renown in his lifetime. When he was on his deathbed, he wanted to see the painting he did of the crucified Christ. The image of Christ was brought to him. Staring at the painting, he spoke the following words as he drew his last breath. "The next time, I will give you everything." Uttering those words, he expired. At that moment, my guide made his one and only comment. "That is why you chose the disciplined life of a priest, giving up everything to serve Christ completely." I was shocked that he made such a statement. However, about a year after that incident, while visiting the famous Prado Museum in Madrid, Spain, I saw that very painting, and my soul was electrified at the sight of it. Goosebumps covered my skin. After the last lifetime, the large stone serving as a screen immediately was gone and left me in darkness. I did a second take as I looked at the clock. It was 9 a.m. 5 full hours had gone by, and I hadn't moved a muscle. I was so entranced by what I was witnessing, time seemed to stand still. I was grateful that I did not have a morning mass that day. Was that a coincidence, or was that planned? Either way, it happened at the right time and day. On the 41st night, I was not awakened at 4 a.m. One could not help thinking about the biblical number 40, the number of days that Jesus and well-known prophets spent in the desert being tested and/or purified before they began their public life. The Israelites on the run under Moses took 40 years to become purified as a whole nation. Is that what was happening to me? Was I being purified and instructed for something special that was yet to come? I had no idea. Surprisingly, about a week later, I had another visit during the night. Then another couple of weeks later. After that, I had one once a month for about 5 months. As unexpectedly as they began, the 4 a.m. visits at this point ended. Thank you for listening, and please join us every Sunday at 3 o'clock for our watch party as we premiere the next chapters of Father Jay's book.